morning and welcome to the Money Beat Show. I am Paul Vigna. Markets are down today. Dow's down about 80, 90 points depending on where we are. It was down 93 points yesterday. So, 2 days in a row of some sort of heavier selling. Don't want to say heavier selling. We're going to talk about that a little later in the show. But first, we want to bring you some breaking news. We're going to Washington with Jerry Seib, who has the details on what just happened this morning, which is President Obama canceled a meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin. Obviously, the Edward Snowden affair is at the center of that. But let's get the details from Jerry. Jerry, what exactly did we learn this morning?
Well, not a big surprise. I think this has been signaled for a couple of days now that President Obama will not have a one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin in Moscow associated with the G20 meeting that's happening in St. Petersburg in September. He's still going to go to Russia, he's still going to go to St. Petersburg to go to the G20 meeting. The White House is not canceling that. But the separate one-on-one meeting with Vladimir Putin has been canned. The White House said in its statement that there were a lot of reasons: lack of progress on arms control, on commercial disputes, things like that. But the truth is the White House was perfectly prepared to go ahead and look past those things and have a meeting with President Putin until the Edward Snowden decision last week to give him asylum in Russia. That's what broke the back of this. I'm not sure it's a giant deal. One meeting is not really a make or break thing for a relationship as important as this one, but symbolically it was something I think the White House thought the president had to do.
Right, and President Obama went on the Tonight Show last night to talk about this. We're going to watch a clip from that. He showed his displeasure.
I was disappointed because even though we don't have an extradition treaty with them, traditionally we have tried to respect if there's a lawbreaker or an alleged lawbreaker in their country. We evaluate it and we try to work with them. They didn't do that with us, and in some ways it's reflective of some underlying challenges that we've had with Russia lately.
Jerry, you said that you don't think this is the biggest deal in the world, and obviously this was sort of telegraphed, but where does this put U.S.-Russia relations? They've never been the greatest. We haven't been the warmest of allies over the years. What does this do to that relationship, though?
Well, the relationship was bound not to be very good when Vladimir Putin resumed the presidency. I mean, he and President Obama do not seem to have gotten along particularly well. President Obama seemed to like dealing with Putin's predecessor, the guy who served in between Putin terms, President Medvedev. But he doesn't seem to get along particularly well with Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir Putin is a nationalist. He kind of wants to reassert Russian independence in international affairs. I think the area where the particular problem is right at hand is Syria. You know, what the U.S. would like to do is come up with an understanding with the Russians that would allow Syrian President Assad to leave, or make Syrian President Assad leave. He's a big Russian ally. You got to work out something with the Russians that assures them that if they let him go, their interests in the Middle East and in Syria will still be preserved by the international community. That requires conversation, that requires diplomacy. That's not what's not going to happen now. So there are a lot of issues that are festering. That's the one that's hot.
Right, and the White House released a statement moments ago. We want to take a look at that quickly, read a bit to it. Read a bit. Following a careful review begun in July, we have reached the conclusion that there is not enough recent progress in our bilateral agenda with Russia to hold a U.S.-Russia summit in early September. Russia's disappointing decision to grant Edward Snowden temporary asylum was also a factor. Jerry, you alluded to that earlier. I want to ask you about Edward Snowden for a second, because a lot of this revolves around him. He is in Russia. He will be there for a year. How does that affect the whole NSA story back here in the States?
Well, look, first of all, if he doesn't get asylum in Russia, we're not having this conversation. This meeting would go ahead. All those other things are a problem, as I said, but there's actually that's actually also the reason to have a summit meeting with Vladimir Putin, is to talk about these areas where we're not making enough progress. So up until the Snowden decision, the White House was perfectly happy, and in fact, eager in some ways to go ahead with a meeting with Vladimir Putin. So Snowden is the real reason this is happening. I think that one of the things that the Russians have done, that Vladimir Putin has done, which should not be lost in the shuffle here, is they've kind of shut Edward Snowden down. Yes, he's in Russia. He's got a year's asylum, but he's also been told you can't be leaking more documents. You can't be speaking out about the U.S. while you're here. So the silver lining in that cloud is the Russians have kind of shut down Edward Snowden as a thorn in the side of the Americans. The U.S. clearly still wants to get him back for a trial, but the problems have probably tapered off as a result of Russian actions at the same time.
All right, Jerry Seib in Washington, thank you. Appreciate the time.